He wasn't supposed to make it. A wounded K-9, blindfolded and broken, collapsed on the porch of a retired Navy SEAL. A man who believed his missions were over and his purpose long gone. The dog carried no badge, no handler, no one coming to claim him. Just a body covered in bruises and a camera harness filled with dangerous secrets. And yet, the moment the SEAL lifted the cloth from the dog's face, something shifted. What followed wasn't instinct, it was divine intervention disguised in fur and faith. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. The midday sun lay over the Seattle suburb like a warm, silent blanket, bright enough to sharpen edges, but gentle enough not to burn. Jack Turner crouched beside his motorcycle in the driveway, a black Harley with matte paint and scars of old miles. His hands, broad, scarred, efficient, gripped a wrench as he tightened a stubborn bolt near the engine, each turn deliberate. There was a stillness around him that wasn't laziness, but vigilance. Even retired, Jack never moved without purpose. Years in the Navy SEALs had carved discipline into his bones. Every muscle remembered the weight of armor, the echo of orders, the pressure of minutes that decided life or death. His body was built on endurance, broad shoulders, rigid posture, a torso trained to withstand impact. His face held the kind of roughness that didn't soften in retirement, square jaw shadowed by uneven stubble, a thin scar that cut through the line of his beard and forced it to grow patchy, slate-gray eyes that observed instead of listened. His hair was cropped close, dark with streaks of gray, not from age, but from the pieces of his past that never stopped haunting him. Jack lived alone at the edge of the city, in a small house with a garage attached, selected precisely because nothing ever happened there. Predictability was a luxury he had never known in uniform. Routine kept his mind quiet, mostly. The metal clicked one last time, and Jack leaned back on his heels, wiping a line of sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. The air carried scents of motor oil, cut grass from a neighbor's yard, and the soft salt hint of the nearby sea. He liked this. Machines made sense. They didn't change their minds or betray you. He checked the alignment once more. Everything was in place, perfect. But then, something cut through the silence. A sound, weak, broken, not mechanical, not human, a whimper. Jack froze, completely still, the wrench hanging loose in his fingers. His mind sharpened in an instant, senses aligning the way they had in countless hostile structures overseas. He listened. At first, there was nothing except distant birds and the low hum of a lawnmower 3 houses down. Then it came again. A strained, tiny sound, more breath than voice, like something trying not to be heard. Jack slowly placed the wrench on the ground and stood, every movement controlled. His posture shifted, shoulders tightening, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. The quietness around him was no longer peaceful, it was alert. He moved toward the porch, not fast, not slow, just steady, the way a predator approaches an unknown shape. As he reached the first step, his gaze dropped. A bundle lay on the wooden porch floor, a mass of dirty fabric, smudged with streaks of grime and something darker. The bundle trembled. Jack's heartbeat deepened. He crouched, fingers brushing the cloth, damp, sticky. He lifted it. The world narrowed to a single moment. Beneath the cloth lay a German, shepherd, not just a pet, trained, muscular even under matted fur, with the square jaw and noble structure that marked a working dog. But this one was hurt, badly. Its fur was smeared with dirt and dried blood, tangled around ribs that rose and fell too quickly. A thick tactical K-9 harness wrapped around its torso, heavy-duty straps and reinforced rings designed for police or military operations. Attached to the harness was a compact action camera, cracked, flickering weakly with a dying red light. But the most frightening thing was this. The dog's head was covered. A stained cloth had been tied around its face like a blindfold, wrapped tight enough to restrict vision, but not tight enough to stop breathing. Whoever did this hadn't wanted the dog to see, hadn't wanted it to know where it was being taken. The dog trembled harder, its breath sharp and shallow. Jack reached out slowly and pulled the cloth from its head. The sight that greeted him made something inside him twist. 2 amber eyes blinked against the light, wide, terrified, disoriented. They darted, searching the world as if expecting pain. That expression, raw fear fighting against instinct, stabbed deeper than any wound Jack had ever taken. He recognized that look. He had seen soldiers wear it, those still conscious after losing too much blood, those who knew they were in the final seconds before darkness. The dog tried to lift its head but didn't have the strength. Its body tensed for impact, bracing for another blow. Jack's hand moved without conscious thought, steady and slow, like approaching something sacred. The dog flinched, but didn't pull away, didn't snap or growl. It simply stared at him with those amber eyes, full of panic and something worse, hope. Jack swallowed. He had carried wounded men who begged to live. He had carried bodies that no longer could. But this living, trembling body on his porch, cut through his walls like a blade. He slipped his arms beneath the dog, surprised by its weight despite the frailty. The German shepherd let out a faint whine, not fear this time, but relief, and pressed weakly against his chest. For years, Jack Turner had avoided anything that required emotional weight. He kept people out. He kept life out. But in that moment, with a trembling K9 in his arms, Jack wasn't thinking of isolation, or peace, or the quiet life he'd built to avoid anything that could break him again. His instincts, the ones older than trauma, older than war, took over. Protect, save, carry. The dog's eyes lifted toward him one more time, filled with confusion, terror, and desperate plea. Jack stood, holding him carefully, cradling the injured shepherd against his chest as though carrying something that might shatter if he loosened his grip even slightly. Without hesitation, without knowing anything except that leaving this dog outside would be unforgivable, Jack turned toward the open doorway and stepped inside. The dog's eyes stayed on him, wild and pleading, as if begging him not to disappear. The room was dim except for a single desk lamp, its warm light spreading across the worn wooden floor, and the wounded German shepherd resting on an old folded blanket. Jack Turner knelt beside him, working with the same controlled precision that once saved teammates on battlefields far from home. The tactical camera he had removed from the dog's harness now rested on the table. Jack connected it to his laptop, waited for the screen to flicker, then leaned closer as the footage began. The first image appeared jerky and low, bouncing with every step the dog took. Shadow's breath fogged the lens slightly, suggesting they were outdoors. A man walked ahead, lean, tall, nervous energy radiating off him, despite his attempt at professionalism. His name patch read Ryan Miller. Ryan appeared to be early 30s, lanky, with sandy blonde hair that looked like he combed it using only his fingers. His uniform jacket fit him too loosely, hinting he had lost weight recently, and the faint shadows beneath his eyes betrayed a lack of sleep. He projected a hopeful determination that had not yet been crushed by bureaucracy. He struck Jack as the kind of cop who wanted to do good, not for recognition, but because he still believed justice mattered. The footage showed Ryan and Shadow stopping at the fenced entrance of an industrial warehouse district. Ryan crouched, adjusting Shadow's harness with gentle hands. The camera caught a small folded document. Warehouse B tonight. Unauthorized shipment. Ryan took a breath, the kind that people take before stepping into uncertainty, and moved toward a side door. The scene shifted. Inside the warehouse, tall stacks of crates reached toward a flickering fluorescent light. Ryan's voice murmured something low. Shadow moved ahead, sniffing the concrete floor, tail stiff and alert. The unit looked abandoned, dust gathering along the edges, but the silence was wrong, not empty, but waiting. Ryan radioed for confirmation. Nothing answered. The camera shook slightly when Ryan tapped his earpiece. More silence. Jack's eyes narrowed. He knew what a comms blackout meant. It meant betrayal. The warehouse lights abruptly died, plunging the space into shadow. Night vision switched on automatically, turning the scene an eerie green. Ryan froze. Shadow growled, low, controlled, not panic but warning. Metal groaned deep in the darkness. A heavy sliding door shut behind them. They were trapped. From the corners of the screen, figures emerged, 3 men dressed in dark tactical gear, their movements confident and efficient. The one in front was broad-shouldered with a squared torso, thick beard, and eyes that revealed nothing. There was something chilling about the way he walked, not hurried, not cautious, just certain. The type of man who believed everything in the room already belonged to him. Ryan raised his weapon, hands trembling slightly, determination pushing through fear. Shadow shifted into defensive stance, hackles rising. The bearded man gave a signal. 2 attackers lunged. Shadow leapt with precision, jaws locking onto the arm of one assailant. The camera jolted violently as Shadow was kicked and shoved, the footage spinning, catching glimpses of Ryan being thrown against crates. The bearded man stepped forward, unbothered, He grabbed Shadow by the harness and yanked the dog upward. Shadow thrashed, claws scraping against concrete. Instead of striking again, the man pulled a long piece of cloth from his pocket, wrapped it over the dog's head, and tied it tight. Darkness consumed the video. Jack's expression darkened. He had seen cruelty, but cruelty towards something defenseless carried a unique flavor: cowardice. Muffled sounds continued, Ryan being slammed into metal, crates shifting, the men dragging both man and dog. The footage vibrated as Shadow was shoved into a canvas transport bag. The zipper hissed. He was trapped, but Shadow was trained. Even blind, he twisted, pressing his body hard against the seams. The footage became chaotic, scratching, rapid breaths, fabric stretching, then a tearing sound. Shadow forced his head into the narrow seam and ripped a hole with his teeth. Suddenly, the footage brightened. A van door had swung open, either forgotten or not fully latched, and Shadow fell from the vehicle onto rough pavement. He hit the ground hard, the impact making the camera jolt. Still blinded by the cloth tied tightly around his head, he ran, guided by scent alone, not vision. Running in the direction his instincts screamed might be safe. Running until his paws skidded against the sidewalk of an unfamiliar neighborhood. Running until his body gave out on a stranger's porch. The footage ended on a final frame, a wooden step, sunlight, Shadow collapsing. Then the screen went black. Jack sat motionless. The dog lying behind him on the blanket twitched in sleep, breathing unevenly. Jack turned his head slightly and looked at him, seeing not just an animal, but a survivor that had chosen somehow to reach his door. Jack had lived long enough to know when fate forced something into your hands. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and felt a shift in himself, heavy, unwelcome, undeniable. Shadow had come here blind, hurt, and desperate. And Jack Turner, a man who had sworn never again to carry anything fragile, was now responsible for something that looked at him not with fear, but with trust. Shadow's eyes, frightened yet pleading when Jack found him, replayed in memory. Jack moved to the dog, laid a steady hand on his head, and felt the trembling slow. The dog's body relaxed the slightest degree, as if finally believing he was safe. The house remained quiet, except for the faint hum of Jack's laptop and the shallow breathing of the exhausted German shepherd resting on the folded blanket near the coffee table. Jack Turner stared at the frozen last frame of the camera footage, jaw clenched. His instincts screamed that the moment he had opened this footage, he had crossed into something he couldn't walk away from. The weight of responsibility pressed heavier on him than any pack he ever carried as a SEAL. He forced himself to think methodically, gather facts, verify, execute. Shadow was evidence. The footage showed a deliberate ambush, organized criminal activity, likely involving illegal arms. As much as Jack wanted to take action himself, justice wasn't his jurisdiction anymore. The right move was to call law enforcement and hand over the video. He reached for his phone. The dog lifted his head weakly at the shift in Jack's posture, ears twitching despite exhaustion. "It's okay," Jack muttered, not sure if the reassurance was for Shadow or himself. He dialed non-emergency dispatch. The line clicked. A smooth, professional voice answered, belonging to a woman. Operator Dana Collins. She sounded around mid-40s, voice calm and practiced. Her tone carried the patience of someone who had heard every kind of emergency and perhaps lived enough life to separate panic from urgency. "Seattle Police Dispatch. What is your concern?" Jack gave the facts without embellishment. He found an injured K9 unit dog on his porch. He recovered a tactical camera from the harness. The footage contained evidence of an ambush targeting a police officer. Dana's tone changed, still steady, but sharpened with curiosity. She asked for his name, address, and a brief summary of what was on the recording. While she worked through protocol, her fingers likely typing rapidly, she tried to reassure him that officers would respond. Jack thanked her and ended the call. He didn't see the other screen flashing elsewhere, another device silently tapping into the call. On the other end of the city, inside a dim corner office of a vacant municipal building, a man sat listening. Lieutenant Cole Maddox, mid-40s, handsome in a severe way, salt and pepper hair, clean shave, posture straight enough to reveal military roots. His jaw was angular, but his smile never reached his eyes. He wore a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves, revealing forearms built more for violence than paperwork. He was the kind of man who held power through information rather than loyalty. Cole Maddox was the mole inside the police department. He had sold information to the criminal syndicate for 2 years, routes, schedules, undercover identities. Enough secrets to bury careers. His reasoning wasn't greed, it was pride. After being discharged from the Marines due to a failed psychiatric evaluation, he had decided to never again let someone else control the battlefield. He listened to the intercepted call, and at the moment Jack spoke his address, Cole leaned back in his chair. His expression was as calm as a waiting storm. So, that's where the dog went. Beside him stood another man, one of the same crew from the warehouse, the bearded enforcer. Up close, the man's beard was coarse and tight along a thick jaw, his eyes flat and colorless. His name was Silas Boone, late 30s, ex-private security with scars across his knuckles, like raised punctuation marks from a life of punching first and thinking later. Silas wasn't loyal to Maddox or the syndicate. He was loyal to money and the chance to hurt someone legally or illegally. Maddox slid a slip of paper across the table, the address he heard Jack recite. Silas smiled, just barely. "We'll handle it." Back at Jack's house, the former SEAL rinsed dried blood from Shadow's coat, working carefully around bruises and swollen patches. Shadow led him, though every muscle remained pulled tight with instinctual vigilance. Even injured, the dog watched the windows, ears twitching at sounds Jack didn't notice. Jack didn't speak to fill silence. He had never been the kind who needed words to feel useful. Instead, he allowed his focus to settle. Clean wound, check swelling, hydrate, feed small portion, restore trust. When Shadow's breathing softened, Jack stepped away to wash his hands. The faucet squeaked faintly as it turned, and for a brief moment, Jack allowed himself to think. Maybe the worst was done. Maybe he had given the dog a chance at survival, and the authorities would handle the rest. But then Shadow's ears shot up, body going rigid. Jack's instincts activated instantly. He turned off the faucet, stepped silently through the kitchen, and peered through the blinds. A black SUV rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac, then a second behind it, then a third. They stopped at the far end of the street. Engines on, lights off. The vehicle sat still like predators waiting for a signal. Jack didn't move. His heartbeat slowed instead of quickening, his body shifting into the familiar cold calm that had kept him alive too many times. That wasn't normal patrol. That wasn't police. Shadow rose shakily to his feet, head low, body tense. His eyes met Jack's, and Jack understood something without needing words. They were here for Shadow, and for whatever Shadow had seen. Jack closed the blinds quietly and reached for the light switch. Darkness washed the house. The hum of the SUV engines outside vibrated through the stillness. Jack moved to the blanket and placed a steady hand on Shadow's shoulder. The dog leaned into him, instinctively trusting the calm certainty in Jack's voice when he whispered, "We're not letting them have you." Shadow exhaled, a tremor of fear mixed with the fragile thread of hope. Night stole across the cul-de-sac like a slow tide, swallowing the last traces of dusk. The black SUVs remained parked at the end of the street, engines off, windows tinted so dark they swallowed reflections. Jack Turner stood barefoot on the hardwood floor, body motionless, eyes tracking every shadow through the blinds. If fear existed in him at all, it sat buried under layers of training and instinct. His pulse stayed slow, steady, calculating. The dog at his feet, Shadow, trembled, but not from weakness anymore. He sensed danger the same way Jack did, without sight, without logic, purely with instinct. Jack murmured a word under his breath, not a command, just permission. Shadow responded by lowering himself onto tense legs, ready to act. The neighborhood was silent. No passing cars, no porch lights flicking on, no dogs barking down the street. Too quiet. Jack moved to the garage door that connected to the kitchen and gently disengaged the deadbolt. He pushed the door open just enough to slip into the garage, Shadow tense at his heel. The garage smelled of oil, metal, gasoline, and quiet readiness. Jack's tools hung along the walls, arranged by function. His motorcycle sat in the center like a black animal held at rest. Jack flicked on only the dim bench lamp, too little to give away his location from outside, just enough to see. The tactical camera and USB drive sat in a small metal lockbox on the workbench. Evidence, proof, motive. Shadow positioned himself beside Jack's leg, every muscle rigid and waiting. It happened fast. A loud metallic crack exploded through the garage door, ramming force. Shadow snarled. Jack didn't flinch. Another hit. A dent appeared, deep and hard. On the third, the door broke inward, folding like thin foil. Two men stormed through the opening. Silas Boone led the charge. At close range, he was even more brutish than the grainy footage showed. Thick neck, heavy shoulders, veins across his forearms bulging like ropes. His beard framed a jaw that had been broken at least once, crooked slightly, adding to his perpetual look of violence. His eyes carried that chilling emptiness of men who enjoyed hurting others, not as a means, but an end. Behind Silas, a second man entered, shorter, wiry, with a crooked nose and uneven buzz cut. His name was Logan Pierce. Logan was mid-30s, twitchy, constantly shifting weight from foot to foot, like someone who lived in perpetual flight or fight mode. His pupils were pinpricks, either from fear or adrenaline. Men like him often couldn't tell the difference. Without hesitation, Silas barked, "Camera, now!" Jack didn't answer. He didn't posture or threaten. Instead, with a calmness that only came from facing death too many times to respect it anymore, he stepped backward toward the workbench. Silas moved first. Logan followed. Jack reached under the bench with one hand, closing fingers around a long steel tire iron. When he turned, it was as if a fuse ignited. Inside the garage, Silas charged. Jack stepped aside and swung with controlled precision. The tire iron smashed across Silas's jaw. The man dropped to one knee, growling low. Logan lunged toward the lockbox, but Shadow reacted first. Injuries or not, instinct overrode pain. Shadow launched himself like a silent missile, jaws clamping into Logan's forearm. Logan screamed, high and desperate, thrashing against the dog's weight. Jack didn't watch. His focus stayed on Silas, the greater threat. Silas recovered fast. He wiped blood from his jaw with the back of his hand and smiled, a cold, dead curve of lips. "You should have stayed out of this." Jack didn't dignify it with a response. Silas swung a wrench he had grabbed from Jack's pegboard. Jack ducked, kicked to the inside of Silas's knee, and struck his ribs. Silas staggered, but didn't fall. The man was a wall. Jack shifted angles, moved lighter, faster. He wasn't the biggest man in most fights. He didn't need to be. He only needed to outthink the opponent long enough to act with precision. Shadow tore free from Logan's arm long enough to reposition at Jack's side. Logan stumbled toward a shelf and grabbed a cordless drill, gripping it like a knife. "You're dead, old man." Jack caught his eyes briefly, calm, measuring, dismissive, and threw a wrench across the garage. It hit Logan squarely in the temple. Logan crumpled to the ground. Silas roared and tackled Jack into the workbench. Tools crashed, metal clanged, but Jack locked his legs around Silas's torso, shifting his weight to reverse leverage. The move rolled them across the concrete floor. Silas threw punches, wild but strong, making up for precision with brute force. Jack felt a fist slam into his ribs, pain flaring, but instead of retreating, he leaned into it. Pain was useful. Pain sharpened focus. Jack used the moment Silas committed to the swing to grab the man's arm and charcuterie it sharply behind his back. Something popped. Silas howled. Shadow lunged, teeth flashing, and clamped onto Silas's thigh. Silas collapsed. Jack stood, chest rising evenly. Shadow held position, not releasing until Jack gave a single sharp gesture. Silas writhed on the ground, gripping his injured leg. Jack grabbed Logan's dropped phone. The screen lit up without a passcode. Amateur confidence disguised as competence. A message on display: "Warehouse Site B, secondary holding. He won't talk much longer." A map pin glowed. Coordinates. A location. Ryan Miller was alive. Silas looked up at Jack. Fury and humiliation twisted into his face. "They'll send more." Jack crouched down, the weight of 38 years and every war he ever fought settling behind his eyes. "Let them." He took the lockbox, the USB, and the camera. Shadow limped to him, leaning subtly into Jack's leg, not seeking comfort, seeking direction. Jack placed a hand on Shadow's shoulder, steady and grounding. Shadow's eyes met. His, sharp, fierce, loyal, a soldier with 4 legs. Jack didn't have to say it aloud. Their mission was decided. Ryan was no longer just a stranger. Shadow was no longer just evidence. And Jack Turner, a man who swore to never again carry fragile things, now carried purpose. The warehouse where Ryan was held lay on the outskirts of the harbor district, surrounded by stacks of shipping containers that created a maze of steel and shadows. Fog rolled in from the Puget Sound, blurring edges and muting color until the world became gray and metallic. Jack parked his truck a block away, killed the engine, and stepped out wearing dark jeans, a black tactical shirt, and a collected expression that gave nothing away. Shadow stood beside him. Wounds had scabbed and stiffened, but adrenaline and instinct sharpened his movements again. The coordinates from the captured phone led here. Ryan was somewhere inside. Jack assessed the building. 2 guards near the loading ramp, another on the catwalk above. Movement inside, but no clear layout. He crouched and lifted Shadow's chin slightly, checking his focus. Quiet. Stay close. Shadow exhaled long and silent, tail still, body coiled. He wasn't just following commands. He wanted this. They advanced under the cover of stacked containers. The warehouse lights cast cones of yellow on cracked pavement. Somewhere inside, a man moaned, faint, weak. Jack's eyes narrowed. Ryan was alive. A new figure stepped into the loading bay, back turned to Jack. This wasn't Silas. It was someone new. He looked mid-20s, tall but slouched forward, maybe 5'11", thin like he never ate enough. Messy brown hair that fell into his eyes. Nervousness radiated off him. He couldn't have been in the criminal world long. He had the skittish look of someone who still expected to be forgiven. Jack approached silently, pressing the tire iron from his belt across the man's throat and pinning him against the wall. "Don't scream," Jack growled low. The man froze, trembling. Up close, Jack noticed the young guard smelled of cigarette smoke and cheap soap. What do you want?" he stammered. "A hostage," Jack whispered. "Lucky for me, you volunteered." Jack's voice remained even. He didn't like hurting people who weren't committed to evil, but he didn't have room for mistakes. The kid, Evan Price, as his badge on his belt revealed, nodded rapidly. Evan wasn't tough. He was scared, probably trapped in this job, because survival didn't always look like heroism. "Inside," Jack said. Evan led him past the loading bay and through the metal door. Inside, the warehouse held makeshift rooms constructed from plywood. Crates of ammunition sat stacked without labels. At the far side, tied to a chair and slumped forward, was Ryan Miller. His face was pale, bruised, split lip, swelling along the jaw. His uniform shirt was torn open, revealing a trail of dried blood along one shoulder. Even unconscious, Ryan looked like someone who hadn't yet given up, jaw clenched, head tilted as though his body still resisted. "Ryan," Jack murmured. Ryan's eyelids flickered but didn't fully open. A deep bruise darkened the side of his rib cage. Jack touched his neck gently, pulse, present but weak. Shadow stepped forward, sniffing Ryan's hand, then nudged it with his head. Ryan stirred at the touch. Shadow whined softly. Ryan didn't need to see to understand. "Shadow?" His voice cracked. Jack cut the ropes binding Ryan's hands. "We're getting you out," he said. Ryan looked up, vision blurry, trying to focus on Jack. Who are you?" "Someone the dog trusted," Jack replied simply. Before they could move, footsteps echoed from the catwalk above. Jack spun and shoved Ryan behind a crate. Shadow dropped low. 3 men stormed into the open, Silas Boone and 2 armed goons. Silas's leg was still bandaged from Shadow's bite, rage contorting his expression. "I warned you, Turner," he snarled. "You should have stayed out of this." Jack stepped forward with a calmness that seemed impossible in a room full of guns. "I don't listen well." "Kill him," Silas ordered. They fired. Jack tackled Ryan and rolled behind a crate. Bullets ripped through plywood. Shadow sprinted across the open space, fast and silent as a specter, disappearing behind stacked crates. Jack grabbed a metal pipe from the floor and struck the base of a hanging chain lamp. The light crashed to the ground, sparks showering the floor, plunging the warehouse into deeper shadow. Gunfire erupted blindly from the men. Shadow used the chaos and leapt from behind the crates, teeth locking onto the wrist of the man closest to him. The gun clattered away. Jack stood, drove his shoulder into the second man's ribs, slammed him against steel, and disarmed him with precision. Silas charged, swinging a heavy crowbar, but Jack blocked the strike and drove his elbow into Silas's throat. Silas staggered. Shadow released the first man and pivoted towards Silas, snarling. Silas, wheezing, raised his gun at the dog. Jack moved faster. He grabbed Silas's wrist and forced the gun downward. The shot fired into the ground. The 2 men wrestled, muscles straining. Jack's jaw set as he twisted the gun from Silas's grip, slammed the crowbar across Silas's knee, and brought him crashing to the ground. Sirens wailed in the distance. Evan, the scared young guard, had slipped away during the chaos, and he called the police. Within minutes, blue lights strobed through the warehouse windows. An FBI response team swept in, weapons drawn. The lead agent entered, Agent Sarah Dalton, late 30s, tall, lean, with dark auburn hair pulled into a tight braid that matched her sharp posture. Her eyes were focused, intelligent, someone who had worked too long in federal law to be impressed easily. She wore minimal makeup, her face defined by strong cheekbones and a no-nonsense expression. "Turner?" she asked. "We got your message through dispatch." Jack handed her the camera and USB. Sarah glanced at Shadow and Ryan, then back at Jack. "You just dismantled a trafficking cell." Jack shrugged. "Dog did half the work," Sarah didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "We'll handle it from here." Ryan was taken out on a stretcher. Shadow walked beside him until Ryan's hand found the dog's fur and went limp again from exhaustion. Weeks later, the world was different. The syndicate collapsed. Agent Sarah Dalton personally delivered the commendation to Shadow's precinct. K9 Shadow, commendation for bravery. Yet when the decision came to retire Shadow due to trauma, the dog simply walked away from the officers and laid himself at the feet of Jack Turner on the courthouse steps. No command, no hesitation, just choice. Jack looked at the dog. Shadow looked back. Amber eyes steady, no longer pleading, just sure. The officer holding the leash sighed. "He's choosing you." Jack exhaled, slow and deep, then knelt and rested a hand between Shadow's ears. Then stay. There on Jack's porch, weeks later, Shadow stretched out exactly where Jack first found him. Not because he was lost, but because he was home. And Jack, who had never asked for anything soft in his life, finally let someone stay. In a world that often feels loud, broken, and rushed, sometimes a miracle arrives quietly. On a porch, in a moment of fear, wrapped in uncertainty. Shadow found Jack not by chance, but by grace, as if God placed one wounded soul in the path of another so they could heal together. We rarely notice the miracles around us because they don't always appear as lightning or answered prayers. They show up as a second chance, a stranger who cares, or a loyal companion who chooses to stay. May this story remind us that rescue works both ways. Sometimes we save someone, and sometimes they save us without ever speaking a word. If you believe that every act of kindness is guided by something greater than ourselves, share this story so others can feel that reminder too. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and help spread more stories of hope. May God bless and protect you, and every living soul you hold dear.